Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast powered by Siemens. And now, your host, Niall Sullivan.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Trend Detection Podcast. I'm really pleased to have, I'm going to say a recurring guest, but it's been quite a while since he's been on, but we've got Richard Jeffers from RS on the podcast today. He's been on at least maybe a couple of times in the past, even when we used to do live events way back when. He was on with my colleague Rob Russell as well, but really pleased to have him back. We're going to be talking about his illustrious career. Don't want to maybe not build that up too much, but no, it's really a fantastic and fascinating career. You've worked for loads of different companies, and obviously can bring a lot of insights to our audience. I'm really excited to have the conversation. But I guess first of all, Richard, for those who don't know you, maybe it'd be good to just introduce yourself.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me back, Niall. So as Niall said, I'm Richard Jeffers. I head up the solutions and technical teams within RS in the UK. You probably know us as RS Components. Been here for about 8 years now, but prior to RS, I spent my career in operations and maintenance management, predominantly in the beverage sector. So I normally tell people that my career was spent running breweries, building breweries and maintaining breweries.
Yeah. My favourite topic matter, actually, but for completely different different reasons to you, maybe. But yeah. So you mentioned breweries and maintenance. I mean, we could start there first of all. So, what led you to sort of start your career in maintenance?
Well, actually, it all starts back to when I was first started work back in the early 90s. I'd been in the reserve forces at university. And then when I transferred out of the Officer Training Corps into a more mainstream part of the reserves, I joined the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, which is the maintenance arm of the British Army, and commanded first of all a workshop platoon, and then commanded a light aid detachment in an armoured regiment. So that was what really got me into the world of maintenance first of all. In terms of my career in maintenance, from a mainstream work perspective, that happened several years later, back in my late 30s, when I moved from being a factory general manager of our brewery up in Newcastle into a central role looking at a number of things, including maintenance.
And you mentioned there actually about working in regiment and that sort of things. How has that, I guess, sort of helped inform your career? In terms of how it's gone. Do you still draw on lessons learned from that sort of early stage or early part of your life?
Yeah, I'm very much so, and I think the biggest impact that the military's had on my career throughout my working life has actually been on the subject of leadership. I think there's a lot of lessons from military leadership that you can take into the workplace, as well as lessons from other sectors as well. So a lot of my leadership study definitely comes from studying military leadership, but actually from an engineering and maintenance perspective, all the armed forces really have to think about long-term asset management, because that your fighting vehicle or fighting ship is going to be in service for many, many years beyond the design life of that asset. And you also know that it's going to be used in ways that the maintenance function don't wish it to be used in. So actually recognising the fact that the asset has to deliver value to the user over many, many years is a key thing that I took out of my, starting maintenance with a military background.
Yeah, and actually, just a note on that. So in the past, you'd have to go through the archives a little bit, but for people listening, I actually interviewed a colleague. I say a colleague from Brightly because it's a Siemens owned company, but Corey Dickens, his name is, and I interviewed him, and I think he'd been in the Navy, I believe, in the US, and so he had some interesting parallels to draw between his career path as well. So I think that'd be interesting for people as well. But in terms of that sort of segue, I guess, from the military to, manufacturing, how did that sort of take place? I could see the overlaps. You've explained those quite well, but how did that sort of happen in practice, I guess?
Well, because I was a reservist, not a regular soldier, I had a day job. Started out in design engineering, realised that wasn't for me. Moved into be an operations team leader in a business making solder wire and solder powder. And then spent some time as a site general manager in my late 20s, running a business unit making shower doors and shower enclosures, which was pretty simple from a maintenance perspective, but taught me an awful lot about management of people and management of flow through a factory. But I guess, in terms of really technical operations and maintenance roles, it started when I went to work in the brewing industry in my early 30s. First of all, in our brewery in Reading, where after a short period of time as a process improvement engineer, I then became the packaging manager of a couple of high-speed can lines. And high-speed can lines are expensive, complex assets. To buy one of those these days would be 15 to 20 million plus civils. So they are expensive assets that are going to have a 25-year plus lifespan. And getting into what were real maintenance-induced failure and what were failures caused by failure of components versus what were operator-induced failures caused by setup adjustment issues. It was, I guess, my first sort of real introduction to the challenges of maintenance and operations working together and understanding what maintenance can and cannot do to improve the performance of an asset.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned there. So one of the things we wanted to discuss today is about sort of maintenance strategy, which I guess the question's about the key components of a maintenance strategy, which is incredibly broad. But maybe we could sort of frame it a little bit in the sense of how has that sort of evolved over your career, let's say. Maybe.
I think the world has known how to do maintenance since the fundamental research in the 60s and 70s and the development of reliability center maintenance coming out of civil aerospace into the space program, and then beyond. So actually the fundamentals of how do you manage your assets, how do you look at leading indicators of failure, how do you balance the cost of maintenance versus the cost of failure, we've all known about, and that research is not new. So for me, the concept of the maintenance strategy hasn't really changed at a super high level. What is still a challenge for a lot of businesses is how do you take your brand strategy, your commercial strategy, turn that into an operational strategy, and then from that turn that into a maintenance strategy, and how do you see through your maintenance strategy in a complex and confusing world where people are responding to urgency rather than to priorities.
And that's interesting, Nate, how you mentioned sort of different parts of the business, so operations, maintenance and stuff. Is that a common thing you see, is that a lot of these things are done in isolation? So it's not one joined up strategy, it's often everyone's doing their separate thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The number of times I speak to maintenance people in our customers at RS, and you say, what is your commercial strategy? What is your corporate strategy? And they don't know the answer to the question. And actually, your assets only exist in order to deliver, your fundamentally your brand strategy. So if you don't understand those commercial goals, then you're not going to make good decisions as a maintenance professional. And you're also not going to understand the trade-offs that you always have to make in any part of a business. Managing maintenance is about managing risk. So if you don't understand the risk profile of the business, then you're not going to make good decisions about maintenance.
No, exactly. You need sort of the full picture, right? And everyone's input into that. I was also going to say, in terms of let's say the C-suite as well. So does that filter? Is there often a disconnect? Filtering up and filtering down. I guess that sort of.
Yeah, very much so now, because if you don't speak the language of business, then you're not going to influence business decision makers. So I remember talking, back in my brewing days. When we were looking at a very major investment in one of our breweries. And actually, in order to get the engagement of the C-suite was actually about talking about our brand strategy around growth in bottling and to talk about our cost base of our number one brand. And actually, the asset strategy, of which maintenance was a subset of that asset strategy, was all about increasing our flexibility to bring new products to market in glass, and reducing the overall cost base of our number one brand, which in turn translated to a significant uplift of profitability of that particular brand. But if I just come along and talked about reliability centered maintenance, and P2F curves, I'd have got very short shrift and achieved nothing.
No, exactly. And how, I guess, broadly speaking, because again, broad topic, but how's technology sort of influenced or been fed into these sort of discussions? I guess they're at the sort of the forefront, but again, to frame the question a little bit, I think it's this thing where technology is brought in just because it's cool, maybe AI technology or Gen AI technology, rather than thinking of that sort of business. What's that business goal? That should be sort of still at the fundamental part of that. But I guess first of all, how has technology changed those conversations you were just talking about?
I think what technology does, Niall, is allow some of these things to be brought to life at a much more attractive price point. So when I first took over running as a brewery general manager in 2004, we had a high number of failures on a motor-driven gearbox in the brew house, and we deployed some electrical motor current signature monitoring onto that, and that was £20,000 for one motor. If I look at that same technology now, you'd be looking at £2,000 to deliver that. So the price of data acquisition has dropped dramatically, and I think also the decision support tools that are now available to you mean that it's now possible to process the insight from that data at scale. So again, back with that deployment of current analysis, we relied on a skilled reliability engineer to look at that data and interpret that data. And there was an absolute limit to how many data points that reliability engineer could look at. If you look at now, machine learning platforms, decision support tools around maintenance, allows you to, reduce the skill required at point of use to analyze that data, and allows you to process, 10, 100,000 times more data points in the same time. So it's a real force enabler and a real multiplier of capability with the technologies available now. So cheaper data and faster and cheaper data analysis and interpretation.
I guess if you think all the way back then, Richard, so obviously now, like I said, with technology advanced and I know, from our own experience with Senseye, the selling and deployment of technology is, can be, quite complex, lots of people involved. But if you think back all the way to those days, with, you said the motor, the £20,000, like, what did you have to go through to get that, to justify that investment? What was the sort of cultural, maybe even a cultural shift as well at that time, maybe?
So at that particular time, because I was the budget holder for the site and it was within my my spend profile, I was able to work very closely with the reliability team on sites to do that. So my site engineer had already talked me into the value that could be had by a reliability centered approach to maintenance. We weren't going all the way through to RCM itself, but we were definitely thinking in terms of reliability and thinking in terms of operator asset care. From that, we were able to start thinking about what are the major breakdowns that we do wish to insure against, where the cost of failure significantly outweighs the cost of detection or the cost of mitigation. And it was a problem we'd experienced, so we had pain that we wished to alleviate. And this was one of a number of different solutions that we explored, and the one that we finally went ahead with.
It's interesting because a lot of the stuff you described. So I think I'll give predictive maintenance as an example, and I think I'm trying to remember the conversation. It might have been in one of our previous conversations, Richard, maybe during the live event. I'm sort of picking up things, that you've sort of said before then, but about predictive maintenance not being like a new phenomenon. And it's like, and I listened to a webinar of ours yesterday in the US, and my colleague Natalie was sort of talking about how, predictive maintenance is a strategy. and like Senseye, for example, is a tool kind of thing. And has that sort of got maybe more confused over the years? These kind of things are blended in, and so predictive maintenance suddenly becomes a technology rather than being, and as another customer of ours put it, like a tool in their toolbox amongst other tools that they might use in a certain situation.
Yeah, I think people look at predictive maintenance as like, one day we'll move into a world of predictive maintenance. For me, the world is not like that at all, and never will be, because actually, run to fail is a perfectly valid maintenance technique. Sorry, if you have taken the effort to understand the cost of maintenance versus the cost of detection and prediction. So, nobody, very few people will deploy a predictive maintenance technology on the luminaires in their office lighting. Why not? Because the cost of failure is minimal. And the cost of detection is massively outweighs the value you create from it. So run to fail is a perfectly valid technique as part of a balanced maintenance strategy. Full-blown predictive maintenance with, multiple different leading indicators of failure being put into a multivariate model is a very legitimate technique for high value, high cost of failure, high consequence of failure assets. They've all got to be parts of a balanced maintenance strategy. And I think, I'll go back to what I said earlier. The concept of what makes a maintenance strategy is not new. The rise of industrial IoT, cheaper data, better data analysis, machine learning, generative AI makes it easier, cheaper, and fundamentally easier to do at scale. But actually, the underpinning thinking, is not new technology. It was all happening when I was at first school.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's just been made. Yeah, like I said, it's been made more efficient and easier by technology. Nothing, the fundamentals don't sort of change. I like your analogy. You were sort of saying there, because every time you said balanced, I was thinking like balanced diet. But maybe that's just my own personal, thing I'm thinking of there. But it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the common example I hear is like, you don't want to change. You don't need predictive maintenance for a light bulb. To change a light bulb, right? You just change it when it fails, and then not fails, but it just needs replacement. It needs replacing. So it's about applying these strategies in the right areas at the right time based on business goals. Maybe is a good way to summarise.
Precisely, yeah. And there's a really good model by the Institute of Asset Management around how you balance business goals, the asset life cycle, skills, resources, cost. Which for me is a brilliant model. I'd recommend anybody to go and look at it about all the things you need to take in mind when developing an asset management strategy, of which maintenance is a subset.
No, absolutely. And I know we sort of touched upon then about IoT and AI and these sort of new technologies, but I guess from your perspective, Richard, are you seeing a lot more adoption of these or acceptance of these as something that can really have a business impact, as we've been talking about, not just a sort of, this is a bit of a cool bit of AI we should be doing, or especially with Gen AI now, it becomes even more, the danger is this stuff becomes a bit more gimmicky than actually focusing on the outcomes. But is there a general acceptance that we must have this technology now? It's a must, not a we could have it kind of thing.
I think there is a growing, I've been looking at this space for 5 or 6 years now. So I've seen it growing towards maturity. I don't believe it is mature yet. But I was talking to an analyst that I work with regularly, and they were saying actually they see now that we're getting to the chasm. In Moore's crossing the chasm theory of the early adopters, the early majority. We are starting to now move from the early adopters who were happy to give it a go, and accept the risk, into now starting to move into that early majority. And certainly when I talk to larger businesses now, there is much more of an awareness that this is happening, and they probably need to have a strategy around it, and they need to be thinking about it. It's not yet in a position where people see it as a must-have technology, and which always sounds me, it must be said, particularly in some of the low cost condition monitoring, nobody would consider buying a car without, automatic oil level detection. And yet people are happy to buy machines that don't have the same technology that we all rely on in our daily lives, in our cars.
So I wanted to move on to sort of a slightly different topic that you did mention earlier, Richard, which was really interesting, but we were sort of going off on a different tangent, so I didn't want to sort of bring it back to that stage. But one thing you did mention was about leadership, which I thought was interesting because, I've noticed, knowing you over the past few years, you're clearly a natural leader in the way you speak and sort of portray sort of your vision at RS, absolutely the case. But how important is that in the context of sort of building a maintenance strategy and really, driving that culture change throughout an organisation?
I mean, like whether it's anything to do with operational management, the leadership is critically important. You've got to create a vision for people. You've got to create a why change story. You've got to encourage people to make those small steps that will move you towards your goal. And you've got to keep supporting people. I happen to use the Cotter change model. Other change models are available, but actually, you've got to think about what goes into that change program, change process that you're taking people on, and then apply that in the context of increasing your asset reliability. If you're talking about maintenance. You've got to empower those small teams to make improvements, get those quick wins, and you've got to look how to expand those wins out into other areas.
Yeah, and I guess when we talk about leadership as well, to your point earlier, it's about not just leadership within maintenance, but leadership throughout the organisation, all of those key areas, operations, the C-level, etc.
Yeah, maintenance does not exist in isolation, Niall. It has to be part of an overarching, corporate strategy, operational strategy, asset management strategy. You can't just maintain assets, and have them sitting there shiny. Ultimately, those assets have to create value. That's what those assets are for. And your maintenance strategy feeds into creation of value through those assets. We're not in an industrial environment trying to have a classic car that we keep perfect. We're trying to have assets that create value in the hands of the user.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess just as we sort of draw towards the end, I'm saying that because there's still a couple of questions on my list, so we're not right at the end. But in terms of what you're seeing as, looking forward and what's in the future, Richard, what do you see as sort of the next sort of trends in the industry with regards to maintenance?
I mean, there's no doubt, as we've talked about already, Niall, that the technology is getting cheaper and more accessible. But one of my increasing frustrations as I move through my career is the lack of understanding about the underpinning principles of maintenance. And I think maintenance is still a poorly understood discipline. There is still a belief in many people that time-based maintenance, taking things to pieces to find out why they're not broken yet, is the right approach. Again, back to the car analogy. Nobody would change their tyres every 12 months, regardless of wear. They would all want to measure the tread on those tyres and then make a decision as to whether to change the tyres based on condition. But actually take that into an industrial environment, and suddenly everybody's back to time-based maintenance again. And I think there is a fundamental issue as to how we develop not just maintenance professionals, but also operational professionals to understand what does a good balanced maintenance strategy look like, and how do maintenance and operations work together to drive that forward. I mean, for businesses that do embrace lean and TPM, that's there. It's all there in the TPM methodology, and then the tools and the technologies can really enable it. But if a business isn't embracing the fundamentals of ops and maintenance working together to drive value, then you can throw as much technology as you like at the problem, but it's still not going to make the change that you wish to have.
No, exactly. And I mean, I'm asking this a lot on a lot of the podcasts I'm doing at the moment. But do you see this shift towards sort of Gen AI as well? Taking hold and and accelerating that sort of change within the maintenance industry, or is that going to take a while to adopt as well? Do you feel?
I think there is a change happening. There is a groundswell, of people starting to see the value. So but it is going to be a long burn. The technology is going to mature faster than organisational capability will mature to get there. And that's why for some organisations, the really top end technologies like Senseye PDM is absolutely the right way forward. But for many businesses that are still sitting, at a lower level of the maturity curve, some of the more traditional services like periodic vibration analysis are still the right answer, because they don't have the organisational culture and capability to take on board a high end tool. And therefore, some of the more entry level tools that you might think are moving towards obsolescence, are still going to be really valid for lower maturity organisations.
Yeah, no, I agree.
We've recently done some research in partnership with the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, and one of the things that comes out of there really strongly is when people are asked, where do you think you are in the maintenance maturity curve? People score themselves very low. Nobody thinks they're particularly mature in the world of maintenance.
And so I guess, Richard, is that, I remember you mentioning that, is that study available to share? We could share in the show notes afterwards.
We will be launching that formally in the middle of September now.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So please.
As an aside, not for transmission, when you communicate with Ruth, just to check this over before you send it out, I'm sure Ruth will be happy to have a conversation with you about sharing that report. But I think it's the 18th of September is when I'm launching it. Is when I'm not launching it. I'm at the launch event.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So happy to support that as well. So I'm sure it'll be of interest, certainly of interest to our listeners as well. But yeah, just to sort of finish, I guess. So to bring it around full circle, so we talked about your career and what you'd achieved, let's say, so far, because there's still a lot to cover as well, I'm sure. But if for someone new starting out in the maintenance field now, what sort of advice would you give in terms of career development and where to sort of focus maybe their time?
I still believe maintenance is a fascinating field and one that's got a huge amount of opportunity to grow in terms of both some of the fundamentals around diagnostic skills and repair skills, but also in the space of data and analytics. There's going to be a lot more data science in the world of mature maintenance, without a doubt. What would be my recommendations? Understand the underpinning theory around reliability centre maintenance. It might be 50 years old, but it's still fresh. I read the works of some of the great thinkers in RCM like John Mowbray, and although they're 30 years old now, they are still incredibly fresh. And there's a great article you can find on the internet around maintenance paradigms, which for me still stands rereading. Many years after it was written. So understand, how components fail, what the leading indicators are, how to measure those cost effectively. And think about how you're going to lead and motivate teams to take action on that insight and data.
Yeah, great. I mean, that's That's really good advice, and a really good way to end as well. I guess the only other thing I'd add is to for those obviously interested to hear more from Richard. I guess from your point of view, Richard, probably LinkedIn is the best place to follow you and connect with you if they've got any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can, very happy to enter into conversations through LinkedIn. And of course, I've got a team of people in RS whose job it is to support people on their maintenance journey, particularly around condition monitoring. So, very happy to engage people informally through LinkedIn, and also clearly happy to engage more formally if people are looking for support and services in helping them grow up, improve their maintenance maturity.
Fantastic. But yeah, so I think for today, that was a really great conversation once again, Richard. I won't leave it so long before inviting you back on again, I'm sure. But I guess for now, thank you for taking part, and thank you to everyone at home for listening, and see you on the next episode.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels, and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.